my
Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. This is Brenda Littleton with Heart of the Matter podcast. And today, once again, we are gifted to host Dr. Natasha Nelson, a doctor of chiropractic as well as integrative medicine, where she deals with everything connected with body, heart, mind, and soul. Her main clientele are high performers, executives, athletes. And today we're looking at something that has surfaced in our community as well as throughout the continent, the topic of grief and how it lives in our body. So welcome, Dr. Nelson.
thank you so much, Brenda. What a true pleasure to be here and gift to be able to connect with you to bring this information. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I have, let me see, I have this little poster that I wanted to share with our audience that I picked up from your website. And it says, grief, a profound loss of people, property, possessions, can also be the loss of security, community, safety, identity, trust, and health. And I also found on one of your pages your description, if I could just spend a minute introducing this to our audience, is what is grief? And you say grief is loss, loss of values, compromise, mortality, loss of connection, loss of your gifts, talents, skills, projects, community, job, business, loss of your identity, loss of a dream, a purpose, meaning, loss of trust, loss of loved one in death, but also loss of a loved person, place, or thing due to change, not necessarily from death. A friendship, our health, a home, a job, a business, a life plan are all a loss. The loss of a person, place, or thing that we poured our love into. So, real deep attachment. When it's gone, there is a hole, a void. The emptiness is the remainder of the love in our heart. I love that. And who we were with that person in that job, in the pursuit of that dream. I often feel like I've been left behind. I've been abandoned by that person, by that loss. We have to grieve that part of us we are saying goodbye to. Grief asks us to become quiet and stop all forward movement so that we may dive into the depths. When grief is incomplete, and this is what we're talking about today, folks. When grief is incomplete, the energy gets stuck and gets stuck in the lungs. I can feel that tearing up right now. To hear the entire episode, well, you have, and we'll talk about your podcast, but we're going to preview that today and dive into the stuckness of the energy of grief and its inner lungs. So can you tell us more about this, please?
Yeah, I was as you were reading, and I remember as I was writing this information, it came from a place of, for me, doing the deep dive when I had to shut down my practice. And when I had to shut it down, it wasn't because I wanted to, it's because I had to at the time. And even though I wanted to shut my practice down because it was time, and I needed to take care of my family, there was such a loss of my identity as a doctor in the pillar and in my community.
Mhm.
And there was so much grief that I had to learn how to understand what that loss was. And because there was a lot of conflicting emotions where I was like, I was glad to shut down the business part. I needed to. So I thought I would feel relieved, and a little bit of me did. But I felt the heaviness of loss of being the community pillar where people came to every day, every week, over 15 years. And so that's really what helped me tap into as I was writing this about grief, because I'm hearing, about, yes, with the tragedy and the fires, where people are like, oh, well, they have money, so it won't be that hard to relocate or rebuild. It's not that big a deal. Insurance, you know, it's like, okay, they have their life, possessions don't matter that much. And I had to pause with that because the profound grief of loss is not just about the possessions of someone's home. It's the loss of the security and everything that goes into it. And the loss of, but it's the loss of community that I'm hearing. The people who, even if their homes were spared, their community is gone. Everybody is now moving, and very few or they're not going to come back the way it was.
Yeah, it's different.
It's different. And so really tapping into, for me, when I really started to understand how energy, and emotion is energy in motion. And so when the energy is not moving, it has an affinity for different parts of the body based on the emotions that we're feeling. And so grief really attaches itself into the physical part of the lungs. And yes, there are so many aspects of the lungs. There's the lung tissue itself. There's the bronchi that go to the lungs. But one of the things that people don't really fully understand is that the lungs don't expand and contract by themselves. It's the muscle of the diaphragm that's connected to the lungs. And that muscle is like all other muscles, where it has to contract and relax and contract and relax. And it's the ability of the diaphragm to contract that pulls the lungs down, which creates that space and void for the oxygen and, air to go in, and then oxygen to go in and carbon dioxide out. And so the reason I like sharing so much is because when you understand how the body works, it helps understand how the energy that gets stuck, how it interferes with the function of certain parts of the body. But it also helps understand how the healing process happens. And one of the ways, you think about just kind of common phrases that people use when they're like, oh, it made me catch my breath, or it made me stop my breath. And, we use those terms and those like kind of catchphrases, which already let us know what part of the body is being affected. And so there's a reason when we feel scared or something, we get frightened, it stops our breath, And so it's the interference of the muscle in the diaphragm and in the muscles in the trachea that interfere with the ability of the lungs to function.
So help me trace this. Like when we experience shock, the grief is the byproduct, the outcome of losing something perceived, something physical, something heartfelt. And I understand the notion when I've evacuated twice from my community due to fire, and I've experienced loss. And I know that space where I rally and say, I'm going to make this better than ever, and it kind of plows through and breaks that veneer of shock. But as a Jungian therapist and somatic trauma specialist, since then, I've realized what you resist persists. And those, we tend to put those unexpressed emotions aside. From a Jungian perspective, we put it back in the unconscious, but somatically the body holds it. And so you're saying that when we deny, dismiss, gaslight ourselves about the full value of shock, the full value, the full potency of grief, that the part of the body that's primarily affected are our lungs. And would you say that it's because we start not fully embracing our breath, that we're truncating our breath, that we're not fully, because we're not fully engaged with what is real, we're bypassing it, and hence then we're not fully breathing?
Yeah, so even think about on the very basic level, when we're in shock, we end up holding our breath.
Yes.
And in that holding of the breath, okay, but at some point, we have to be able to exhale.
Yeah.
And when we don't, it's like when the shock, the ability to exhale is when we are able to recognize and acknowledge what has caused the shock.
Got it.
So it's recognizing it, it's acknowledging it, it's accepting that this has happened.
Yes.
And when you're able to see it and acknowledge that trauma and tragedy has happened, you start with being able to exhale and
Mhm.
acknowledge this is what has happened.
I agree. And as you were speaking, it reminded me, I've hosted several breathwork practices online and in person, and over the last 10 years. And to me, somatic feeling, somatic work is heal it to feel it. And the one way of feeling it is to stay present. And one way of staying present is to do breath work. And inevitably, within the first minute or two, like say a class of 20, there's at least half of the people say, I can't do this. I cannot, it's conscious breathing in, conscious breathing out, maybe a square of breath, holding and waiting. But inevitably, at least half, if not more, of the people say, it's just too many things are rising up. There's too much that wants to come out. I can't stay present. I'm beginning to feel what I don't want to feel.
Yeah. And it's that feeling process. And one of the things that I encourage is being able to, because there is a place for, oh, I'm going to rebuild, or I'm going to power through, or I'm going to change it, fix it, solve it. We need that energy to move forward. But before we move forward, if we do the skipping over, or the spiritual bypass of acknowledging what has happened, then it's going to carry forward. And what'll happen, so we'll use the fires because they're present and recent, is that for those who are taking the time to go back and look at where their homes were, the act of seeing it and smelling it and touching the rubble is what's allowing the present to be about acknowledging what has happened. And the reason it's so important to do that is for those who choose not to. It's not that there's nothing wrong or bad about it, but if they don't find a way to heal through it, every time they smell smoke, every time they see something burning, it's going to re-trigger that part of them that hasn't fully felt and experienced the loss that they had. And so being able to be present enough to feel the loss, feeling it means you're not solving it or fixing it or doing anything to get rid of it. You are letting the loss move through you, through tears, through, you know, just being there. I
Yeah.
say tears because it needs to move. Like tears is a way of actually allowing energy to move up, through, and out.
Yeah. When I went back to my community that fortunately had not burned, but there was a part of it that had, I actually vomited. It was just this volcano, this volcanic activity of thinking the loss of the plants, the trees, the things that could not vacate. And I felt it palpably and viscerally. And it was a moving experience. And I know that I'm not plagued by those nightmares. And I have 3 clients in my practice. They don't know each other, but they're all from different expressions of big fires. And they're all plagued by recurring complex PTSD. And, that's basically why I went back into somatic trauma recovery, was to learn how to titrate back and forth so that the body can go from the autonomic, deal with the polyvagal ups and downs and ins and outs, and the person can actually learn to manage. So I know that if you don't do the process that you're saying, like in current time, make yourself in current time going through the baby steps of beginning to, see, accept, deal with, and then move forward. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Like, what would be, like, if there was 3 steps that if you were at a triage center, helping and providing mental health and public service, you've mentioned acceptance and the tactile, like being present with the actual event and not bypassing it. What would be 3 good steps, 3 simple steps that an individual without a mental health practitioner could actually learn and try it and do it and then start healing?
I'm a big fan of writing. I love the written journal, writing it out, because it's another form of allowing energy to move out of your body and through you and out. Part of acceptance is actually verbalizing what was lost.
Ah,
And so verbalizing, whether you speak it, whether you write it, it's being able to form the words and being able to say what was lost. What exactly did you lose? Because, this is where when people go, oh, well, I didn't lose, my home wasn't lost, or I didn't lose my bank account. Yes, but maybe it was your community, your identity, safety, trust. Being able to articulate and identify what you lost is the first place to be able to know, oh my gosh, that is something that is so important to me that somehow now is no longer there.
okay.
So that's first part.
It's almost like doing a ceremony, yeah, a eulogy.
Yes, yes, there's a being able to eulogize what was lost and identify what was lost, because when you can consciously identify what you have lost, then your actions and choices of whether it's about rebuilding or moving forward, you're aware of what it is you're trying to work to gain. Because if you don't know that, then you are subconsciously going through motions, but you're not really sure why you're doing it or what you're doing, other than, well, it sounds like a good idea, or I should do it, or that's what people are telling me to do. But it won't fulfill you and fill that void unless you can identify for you, yourself, what was lost.
So
And that's a
it's
very personal.
keeping it close in and intimate as opposed to uh pushing it out away from yourself.
Yeah. And one of the things that, and this applies to everything, is that when you push it away, the amount of energy required to keep it pushed away and keep it suppressed and hidden, it's a lot of energy. And a lot of the energy that your body requires for your immune system, for basic function at the cellular level, all of that becomes compromised when you're using energy to push stuff away somewhere else. So, but back to specifically with grief and lungs and the acceptance is that, so part one, like I said, was identify, make it personal. What is it exactly that you have lost?
Mhm.
Once you start with that and the identifying it, then it actually ties specifically with being able to accept it.
Mhm.
Because identifying it is accepting and like, oh my gosh, that's what I lost. Okay, so that's the acceptance piece. There's a little bit more about how, you may have to accept other parts that were part of the loss, like other factors, and you start to just recognize and see it's not about blaming or fault, but it's just recognizing kind of the facts.
Yeah.
There's a factual component of when you can see the facts and kind of put them together. Part of why that's the healing component is when you start looking at connecting the dots of how something happened, you start to realize, okay, there are things you're like, okay, what would I do next time to avoid this or to put myself in a better situation? Well, when you identify the dots, you can start recognizing what you could do differently next time. But it also helps to relieve yourself of this sense of guilt and shame that you were supposed to know everything or do it better or know in advance, like somehow you were supposed to see it. So part of the healing is releasing what you think you should have done differently at that time.
So that's releasing control. The whole idea that you are in control. And there's so much that's becoming evident of we're not in control of much. We're in control of our reactions and how we take care of ourselves. Yeah.
Yes, and we're in control of connecting to the depths of our heart and our soul
Mm.
to know what to do next. And so with acceptance, it's also realizing you don't have to rebuild the whole thing and you don't have to have the whole vision. All you have, part of acceptance is allowing things to be the way they are and slowing it down to take one step at a time.
Yeah, not rushing it.
Yeah.
Um, do you have can you think of anything offhand as far as the type of breath work that you would, that's not a breath work practice per se, as far as somatic work, but just facing these challenges, the idea of really locating yourself in your body and knowing that it is a huge over amount of overwhelm. And as you've said, accepting and taking step by step and being present.
Yeah. One of the things, especially related with the lungs, is being able to put your hand, not necessarily just up on the chest, but actually lower beneath beneath the breastbone, because that's where your diaphragm is going to sit. And being able to breathe and actually watch to see if you can make your hand move while you breathe. Because if you can't, then what that tells you is that you are breathing from a place that's very shallow. And very shallow and nose breathing, you just kind of means that the breath is very short. And part of what allows the depths of the lungs, the grief to be expelled, is the depth of oxygen, of air going in and all of the toxins out. So with your hand just below the breastbone, breathing in from the nose and watching and seeing, can your hand move? And then can your hand move as you breathe in and breathe out? And that forces you to feel the diaphragm and feel the muscle. And
Activates a
exactly. And if it's challenging to do that, it makes you realize where you've been holding your breath, where you've been very shallow in the breathing. Because if you are holding your breath or stifling your breath, there's something that that's connected to your five senses, whether you see it or smell it or hear it, it's stopping your breath. And so it's interfering with a deep breath. And it's once the muscle tightens, you can get a cramp, the feeling of like getting a cramp or tight muscles. You may or may not feel that when it happens in the diaphragm, but it's the same process where it interrupts the full contraction and relaxation of the muscle of the diaphragm.
wonderful. So journaling, acceptance, the breath work, and all of the ramifications and intricacies that go along with all three. Now, you and I are involved in the community based on these fires, and we're both long-term residents of Southern California, and we've gone through lots of fires. And this has been, I'm almost 70, and I've been here since 4 years old, and this has been the worst experience that I've ever witnessed. And lots of friends, lots of communities that I've been living in are involved in the healing process. This is a very specific event. What about another form of holding grief, that when a person becomes ill, like right now, I have bronchitis. It's been 3 weeks. I'm hardly ever ill, but I am ill with bronchitis. And I have noticed that when I do my conscious breathing, as a daily practice. It's been something that's important to me. I stop. I mean, it's painful because of the pleural sacs are filled, and I'm dealing with inflammation. But I do notice that some whispers and long time issues that I've resisted and I've tucked away are sometimes surfacing out and seeping out. And all of a sudden, I'm holding thoughts of some prior grief that has nothing to do with today, that has
Uh-huh.
nothing to do with the last 3 weeks. And so, can you speak a little bit about that? It sounds like you're familiar with it.
Yes. So the word that I'm going to highlight, because it will highlight all the other parts of the body too. You said bronchitis,
Mhm.
and I'm going to highlight the end of that word, which is itis.
Inflammation.
Itis means inflammation, and it's inflammation that's attached to the bronchi in this, example, bronchitis, but bursitis, arthritis,
Mm.
everything that's inflammation in the body is itis. Itis and inflammation actually connects with anger.
Mhm.
Anger and grief go together.
Oh, good.
So, so anger lets us know that there is something that either grief hasn't been complete. And it also can be that anger is letting us know when a boundary has been broken by either someone else or by our own self. Or
Mm.
sometimes it's that there is a boundary that we didn't even know we needed to put up, but got crossed. And so using bronchitis and using the lungs and grief and inflammation and bringing it up with anger. Because remember, anger it's like anger can fuel us, which is a really wonderful emotion to feel when we know how to use the energy of anger to fuel us to do something or make a change. So then I would say, all right, Brenda, let's look to when did you start noticing challenges with your breath? Like, was there a situation or something that happened a month ago or so that you can relate and you can share what you want to share? But is there something that kind of pissed you off or that made you angry or that fired you up? All of the terms fire and anger has to do with inflammation.
So that was more of a precursor, an active, like a hot point, a fire point. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's being able to um, look to what happened that made you feel fired up and a little fiery. And because if you didn't complete or take action at the time of
Mhm.
what you needed to do to restore a boundary, then the lingering bronchitis is just a reminder that you still have something to do, whether you need to say it, take action, whatever the action you need. The flaming heat and inflammatory process of anger is telling you to take some kind of action.
Yeah. It reminds me of the work of Louise Hay as well, that I was raised with my mother, and some of my other postdoc training was involved when there's an original wound that's not dealt with in any time, but the wound creates sadness, and if you don't deal with the wound, you get sadness, and if you don't take care of the sadness, you get anger, and if you don't take care of the anger, you get rage, and so there's this hierarchy, and you can tap into corresponding events and corresponding affects and reflexes. And yeah, it's I will go back and read, because it's been a good 3 weeks, like, and I always say I'm strong as a horse. So interesting. Great. Thank
Yeah, because your body is just letting you know
yeah.
where to pay attention to, what to look at. And it always comes in a form of, we have an immune system, which is that when we're feeding it, fueling it, letting it do what it's going to do, it'll do what it's supposed to do. And so inflammation, things happen. Okay, but your body's like, hey, I'll take care of it. Give me a day or two, maybe a week. But it's when things start to linger and it's not quite resolved and it's not quite going away, that's when you start to go, well, there's an emotional something that's attached. And so putting that layer on top of all the other healing things, is what is one area of, especially when it comes to health in the body, when we feel like we don't have control, we can control the emotional component by leaning into it and understanding it and learning from it. And it gives us a sense of, we may not know how to strengthen the body or what to do with it in the moment while it's healing, but we can help support it. And that's one of the ways to support the body.
So I understand that you provide this support for clients, obviously. Like if someone wanted to contact you, or if it's, and I know you have a, a webinar coming up to
So
deal.
yes, so next Saturday, January 25th at
Okay.
9 a.m. Pacific time. And I will put the link to register for that. It's completely free. No obligations of any kind, just register to show up. I'll put the link in the description with the video here that when we play. So yeah, and that I will do. And in case you're watching this after the fact, I will actually be doing that webinar probably every quarter. So make sure you register, make sure you let me know, and I will, and it's going to be something that it's ongoing.
As well as I hope you, like you have this relationship with other parts of the body, the understanding, and I trust you'll be rolling out other information sessions on other parts of the body with emotional attachments to it as well, right?
Yes. So on my podcast, which is Unleash Your Life Force, it's every week. Now we're going to go into a specific body part with the emotion that's attached to it and how to feel and deal and heal and looking at the body from the whole aspect, the whole body. So on my podcast, it's on YouTube and Spotify or Apple, and it'll be every week. There'll be a new episode specifically breaking down one body part and one emotion that is attached.
Beautiful. I love the feel, deal, heal, the tripod. Yeah, that's great. So,
Yeah.
um, wonderful. Well, thank you, Dr. Nelson. I have learned a lot today, and it's always interesting. It's just great to have you on board and to share what you're doing. And I really believe and support the work that you are putting out there as mental health information, somatic information, trauma release. You have a wide audience in which will need your help. So I really appreciate your efforts towards sharing this information.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for having me here today and speaking and sharing. And I love the teaching because I love when I see and people go, oh my God, that makes sense. I'm all about, you can hear how I talk. I like things to make sense and there's a practical application of what to do. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to share it and to help anybody who's ready to hear this information.
Great. Well, it's valuable, it's necessary, and it's timely. So I
Yes.
appreciate your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I will see you next time.
Take care. Bye,
Okay,
everybody.
bye. Bye, everyone.